The stage lights had already gone dark, but my sister was still standing beneath them, as if she expected an audience to applaud. Amy's hand was wrapped around Peyton's wrist, not hard enough to leave a bruise, just hard enough to remind her daughter who was supposed to decide where she stood. Zoe was beside me near the edge of the empty rehearsal room, her left hand tucked behind her back the way she always hid it in photographs. Amy looked at Peyton and said, "Everything I did was to give you the best possible life." Peyton's face changed. For 18 years, that girl had smiled whenever her mother lifted a camera, apologized before she had done anything wrong, and swallowed every disappointment as if sadness were another kind of failure. Now she looked past Amy and stared at Zoe, at the sister her mother had erased, and at the hand Amy had once called proof that a pregnancy should end. Peyton's voice was barely louder than the hum of the emergency lights. "If I had been born different, would you have abandoned me too?" Amy opened her mouth, but nothing came out. In that silence, the daughter she had spent 18 years shaping into perfection stepped away from her and crossed the room toward the child she had rejected. My sister had spent 21 years choosing between those two girls. That night, they chose each other. Before I tell you how we reached that room, I hope you are doing well wherever you are listening from. Stay with me, because this began 22 years earlier, with an act of love I believed would hold our family together. And please subscribe to the channel so you do not miss what happened next. 22 years earlier, Amy was not the woman standing under those dead stage lights. She was my older sister, the person who had braided my hair before school, hidden my first bad report card until I found the courage to tell our mother, and driven 3 hours through sleet when my college roommate left me stranded at a bus station. Amy could be bossy, but for most of my life I had mistaken that certainty for strength. When she said she would take care of something, I believed her. By the time she was 30, she and Michael had spent years trying to have a child. There had been appointments, injections, procedures, and phone calls that ended with Amy saying she was fine in a voice that meant no one should ask another question. I watched her stop attending baby showers and turn grocery carts around when she passed the infant aisle. She wanted a child so badly that her grief seemed to enter every room before she did. When she asked me to carry an embryo for her, she did not make the request casually. She sat across from me at my kitchen table with both hands around a mug she never drank from. Michael stayed beside her, pale and quiet. Amy explained that the embryos had been created with her eggs and Michael's sperm. Genetically, the baby would be theirs. They only needed someone they trusted to carry the pregnancy. "You are the only person I could ask," she said. "I would know our baby was safe with you." I did not answer that night. I met with the fertility specialist, spoke to an independent lawyer, read about the physical risks, and thought about what it would mean to carry a child who would leave the hospital with someone else. I was 26, healthy and single. I knew generosity did not protect a body from complications or a family from resentment. Amy told me she understood every concern. She promised I would have my own medical decisions, my own attorney, and her support at every step. When I finally agreed, she cried against my shoulder so hard that I felt the wetness through my blouse. "You are giving me my family," she whispered. The transfer worked. From the first positive blood test, Amy treated the pregnancy like a long-awaited celebration. She came to appointments carrying a folder divided into labeled sections. She read parenting books aloud in waiting rooms, spoke to my stomach before there was anything to see, and sent me lists of foods she had approved. At 12 weeks, she taped the clearest ultrasound image inside the cover of a baby album and wrote, "Our little miracle." She chose the name Grace before we knew whether the baby was a girl. Once the test confirmed it, Amy started calling every evening to say goodnight to her daughter. She and Michael painted the nursery a pale cream because Amy said pink looked cheap in photographs. She returned a set of hand-knitted blankets our mother bought because one edge was uneven. At the time, I laughed and told her the baby would probably spit up on everything anyway. Amy did not laugh. She said a child noticed standards earlier than people realized. Those moments bothered me, but only slightly. I thought she was frightened after years of disappointment and trying to control the few things she could. I still believed the first time she held Grace, all that tension would soften into love. At the anatomy scan, Amy sat near my shoulder, while the technician moved the probe across my stomach. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic and warmed plastic. On the monitor, our little girl turned away, then stretched one leg as though resisting the examination. Amy smiled and whispered, "There she is." The technician grew quieter while studying the baby's arms. She adjusted the image several times before excusing herself to bring in the physician. My body reacted before my mind understood why. My shoulders tightened, and the paper beneath me crackled when I shifted. The doctor explained that the images suggested the baby's left hand might not be developing typically. He was careful with every word. He said they needed a more detailed scan, and that one finding could not tell us everything about her health, abilities, or future. Nothing he said sounded like a sentence. It sounded like uncertainty, followed by more information we needed to gather. I asked what the next examination would involve, and whether the baby showed any other concerns. Amy asked, "What are the chances of normal development?" The doctor answered that development was not one simple category, and repeated that more evaluation was needed. Amy stared at the monitor, but she no longer looked at the baby's face. Her eyes remained fixed on the blurred outline of the left arm. Outside the clinic, she walked past the elevator and into an empty consultation room without asking me to follow. Michael closed the door behind us. Amy placed her purse on the table with both hands, carefully aligning it with the edge, as if one straight object could restore order to the afternoon. "We need to make a decision before this goes any further," she said. I reminded her that the doctor had not given us a full diagnosis. Amy shook her head. "That is what they say when they do not want to tell you how bad it could be." "She is still Grace," I said. Amy flinched at the name. "Do not call the pregnancy that right now." It was the first time she had referred to her daughter as the pregnancy. I felt something cold move through me, colder than fear because fear still leaves room for love. Amy lowered her voice, as though gentleness could change the meaning of her words. "End the pregnancy. I want a normal child." Michael looked at the floor. I looked at my sister and waited for the woman who had once driven through sleet for me to return. She did not. I rested one hand over the place where the baby had moved that morning. "No," I said. "I will not do that." Amy's expression hardened. "This is our embryo, our child. You agreed to help us become parents." "I agreed to carry your daughter," I said. "I did not agree to erase her when she stopped matching the picture in your head." She snatched the ultrasound photograph from the table, then seemed to remember she did not want it. Her fingers loosened, and the glossy square slid back toward me. "If you continue this pregnancy," Amy said, "whatever happens next is on you." She left with Michael behind her. I remained in the consultation room holding the photograph she had labeled "Our Little Miracle." That morning, Amy had entered the clinic expecting to see her daughter. By afternoon, she had turned the same child into a problem and called my refusal a betrayal. Amy did not call me the next morning. Instead, she sent 6 links before 7 o'clock, each one about the cost, exhaustion, or strain of raising a disabled child. The articles described marriages collapsing, siblings feeling neglected, and parents abandoning careers to become full-time caregivers. She added no greeting, only one sentence beneath the final link. "Please read these before you make a decision that affects all of us." By lunchtime, the messages had changed from fear to accusation. Amy wrote that I was allowing emotion to override reason. She said she and Michael had spent years creating those embryos, and that I was taking away their right to decide what kind of future they could manage. Every message used careful words, such as responsible, realistic, and compassionate, as though ending the pregnancy were an act of kindness, and continuing it were something selfish I was doing to punish her. I tried answering at first. I reminded her that the doctor had not described a life-ending condition and had not even completed the evaluation. I wrote that a difference in one hand did not tell us who the child would become or what kind of life she could have. Amy replied that I was not the one who had planned to raise her. That sentence stayed with me because it was technically true. I had agreed to carry Amy and Michael's child, not become responsible for her future. Yet the more Amy insisted that the baby belonged to them, the more she spoke as though the body carrying that baby belonged to them too. I called the attorney, who had reviewed the agreement for me before the embryo transfer. Her name was Laura Bennett, and she asked me to bring every message Amy had sent. I sat in her office the following afternoon with my phone on the table and the contract open between us. My hands shook when I admitted that I had once believed the agreement would protect our family from exactly this kind of conflict. Laura read the medical section twice. She explained that Amy and Michael's wishes mattered, but they did not have the authority to order a medical procedure on my body. The contract documented what everyone had discussed before the pregnancy. It did not remove my right to make decisions about my own care. What happens if I refuse? I asked. Laura did not soften the answer. The relationship may collapse. They may withdraw emotional or financial support. There could be legal disputes about responsibility after the birth, but they cannot force you to terminate a pregnancy. I looked at the signature I had placed beneath Amy's months earlier. At the time, the page had felt like proof that we trusted one another enough to prepare for difficult possibilities. Now Amy was treating it like a receipt for control. Laura told me to stop arguing through emotional messages and preserve every communication. She also advised me to begin thinking about what would happen if Amy and Michael continued distancing themselves. The baby would need a clear plan at birth, regardless of what the adults felt by then. I left her office with a folder against my chest and the frightening awareness that refusing Amy was only the first decision. More would follow. Michael came to my house that evening without her. I almost felt relieved when I saw him through the window, until I opened the door and noticed he would not meet my eyes. He stood in the kitchen where Amy had once shown me nursery paint samples, turning his wedding ring around his finger while I waited for him to speak. "She is falling apart," he finally said. "She barely sleeps. She keeps saying she cannot survive another disappointment." I told him the baby was not a failed treatment. He flinched when I said baby, but he did not correct me. Instead, he asked whether I understood what raising a child with special needs could do to a marriage. "We do not even know what help she will need," I said. "You heard the doctor." Michael stared at the floor. "I know what he said. I also know Amy. If this continues, I may lose her." The honesty of that sentence hurt more than another argument would have. He was not asking me to protect the child, or even to protect him. He was asking me to make Amy's fear disappear, so that he would not have to choose between his wife and his daughter. "Make this easier for everyone," he said quietly. I placed both hands on the kitchen counter, because I no longer trusted them not to shake. "You mean make it easier for Amy?" Michael did not deny it. He left a few minutes later, saying they needed time, but the conversation had already clarified what time would not change. He was afraid of losing Amy. He was not yet afraid of losing the child. My mother called after he left. Diane had spoken to Amy and wanted me to remember that my sister was frightened, grieving, and not thinking clearly. She said fear could make good people say terrible things. I told her fear might explain Amy's words, but it could not make the choice for me. "She is your sister," Mom said. "And this is her daughter?" I answered. "Why does everyone keep asking me to remember Amy, while Amy is trying to forget her?" Mom grew quiet. She did not agree with me, but she stopped telling me to be patient. That silence felt different from Michael's. His protected Amy. Hers protected the idea that our family could still return to what it had been. The specialist appointment took place 4 days later. Amy did not come. Michael sent a message 10 minutes before the appointment saying they needed space and would review the report afterward. I read those words while sitting alone in the waiting room, surrounded by couples holding hands and whispering over folded paperwork. The scan lasted nearly an hour. The specialist confirmed that the baby's left hand was not developing typically. He also showed me her heart, spine, kidneys, legs, and the steady rhythm of her movement. Everything else visible that day appeared to be developing as expected. He was careful not to promise what no scan could promise, but he did not describe a child without a future. I asked whether she might need occupational therapy, adaptive tools, or surgery after birth. I asked what specialists should evaluate her and what I should prepare for during delivery. The doctor answered each question without treating the child as a tragedy. By the time I left, I still felt afraid, but the fear had changed. It was no longer fear of what she might be. It was fear that the people who had wanted her would refuse to know her. I sent Amy a short summary and offered to speak with the specialist together. She did not respond until late that night. Her reply arrived as an email rather than a text, formal enough to feel as though she had written it for a stranger. She said I had violated the spirit of our agreement by refusing the choice she and Michael believed was responsible. She accused me of forcing them toward a life they had never consented to live. Near the end, beneath several paragraphs about medical uncertainty and emotional limits, she wrote the sentence I would never forget. I won't spend my life raising a damaged child. I read it 3 times. The first time, I felt heat rise into my face. The second time, my hand moved over my stomach as if I could keep the words from reaching the baby. The third time, I stopped looking for the sister I remembered inside the message. Laura had told me to preserve everything, so I printed the email. The machine hummed while the page emerged inch by inch, turning Amy's cruelty into black letters I could hold. I placed it in the legal folder with the contract, medical notes, and unanswered messages. I hated myself for doing something that felt so cold. But I was beginning to understand that love without preparation would not protect the child from what came next. Amy stopped attending every appointment. Michael's messages became brief and practical, asking for reports but avoiding any mention of the name Grace. When I used the name, he ignored it. After another week, he wrote that he and Amy needed space until they could decide what involvement was possible. That was when I stopped planning for reconciliation and started planning for birth. Laura connected me with a family law attorney who explained the need for a temporary caregiving arrangement if Amy and Michael refused to take responsibility immediately. We discussed hospital communication, emergency decisions, and the importance of preventing the baby from entering the world without a clearly identified adult prepared to stay beside her. I did not know what Amy would ultimately sign, or whether she would change her mind when the baby was born. I only knew I could no longer leave the child's first days dependent on Amy's mood. Every practical decision felt like admitting that my sister might truly abandon her, but refusing to prepare would only make the baby carry the consequences of my hope. I called Amy one final time as the delivery date approached. The call went to voicemail. I waited for the tone, then spoke before fear could make me soften the truth. She is still your daughter. Whatever you decide about me, she is still your daughter. Amy never called back. 3 days later, before sunrise, I woke with a tightening pain across my abdomen and warm fluid spreading beneath me. As I reached for my phone, I understood that the time Amy had requested was over. Her daughter was coming, whether she was ready to face her or not. The first pain woke me before dawn, sharp enough to pull the air from my lungs. By the time I reached the hospital, the contractions were close together, and my mother was gripping the steering wheel as if she could hold the whole situation in place. Diane kept asking whether I had called Amy. I told her I had left a message. Neither of us said what we knew. If Amy wanted to come, she had been given every chance. Labor narrowed the world to breath, pressure, and the cold rail beneath my hand. Between contractions, I watched the door. Every time footsteps passed in the hallway, some part of me expected Amy to enter wearing the determined expression she used whenever she believed a crisis could still be organized. The door remained closed. My mother stayed beside me, but even then, she seemed divided between the daughter and the bed. and the daughter who had chosen not to be there. She wiped my forehead, held a cup to my lips, then stepped into the hallway twice to call Amy. Each time she returned, she said there was no answer. Michael sent a message while I was pushing. He asked whether the baby's heart rate was stable and whether the doctors had seen anything besides the hand difference. He did not ask how I was or say he was coming. I read the message once, handed the phone back to Mom, and told her not to answer until the baby was born. When the final contraction came, the room filled with movement. A nurse told me to look down, and then a cry rose above every other sound. It was angry, startled, and alive. The doctor placed the baby against my chest. She was warm and slippery, with damp dark hair and a furious little mouth. Her left hand had not fully developed, just as the specialist had expected. The nurse examined it with the same calm attention she gave the baby's breathing, color, and heartbeat. No one gasped. No one called her damaged. I stared at her face, trying to find the child Amy had described as a future burden. All I saw was a newborn, blinking against the light. Her small arm moved across my gown. When I touched the side of her hand with one finger, she curled what she could around me. The grip was uneven but determined. Amy had looked at an ultrasound and seen what was missing. I looked at the baby in my arms and saw someone trying to hold on. Mom leaned over the bed. Tears slid down her face, but she did not reach for the baby immediately. "She looks like Amy did when she was born," she whispered. The resemblance made the empty doorway feel larger. I asked Mom to take a photograph and send it to Amy and Michael. Their daughter was here. The image should have been enough. Michael replied 20 minutes later. He asked for the pediatrician's evaluation. Amy said nothing. The hospital social worker came that afternoon because our attorneys had warned the staff that the intended parents might not accept responsibility at birth. She explained the temporary plan already prepared. Until legal responsibility was clarified, the baby could remain in my care under a formal caregiving arrangement, with medical decisions documented through the proper channels. I signed where my attorney directed, still wearing a hospital bracelet and holding the baby against my shoulder. The papers did not make me her mother. They made sure she would not become a question passed from one office to another, while the adults argued. Amy and Michael requested more examinations before making a final decision. A pediatric specialist checked the baby's heart, spine, hearing, reflexes, and movement. Apart from her left hand, nothing immediate suggested a serious health problem. The doctor explained that no one could predict every future difficulty for any newborn, but there was no reason to assume this child could not grow, learn, adapt, and live a full life. Amy joined one conversation by phone. I heard her voice through the speaker while the baby slept in the clear bassinet beside me. "Can surgery make her look normal?" she asked. The doctor explained that future specialists could discuss function and possible treatment, but no ethical physician could promise to reshape a child into someone else's idea of normal. Amy asked whether the difference might become more noticeable as the child grew. She never asked whether the baby was comfortable, what she weighed, or whether she opened her eyes. When the doctor refused to offer certainty, Amy said she and Michael were not prepared to assume responsibility. Her voice was controlled, almost businesslike. Then the call ended. I sat beside the bassinet after everyone left. The baby slept with one cheek turned toward me, unaware that two people were waiting for a guarantee before deciding whether to love her. I had believed birth might change Amy. Instead, it removed the last excuse for pretending her fear was temporary. Taking the baby home, under the temporary arrangement, was not the same as deciding to raise her forever. During the following weeks, I met with a family law specialist, a social worker, and a financial counselor. I counted my savings, measured the space in my small house, reviewed health insurance, and calculated how many clients I could keep while caring for an infant. Every practical question carried a lifetime behind it. Who would stay with her if she needed therapy? Could I work from home often enough? What would happen if I became ill? Was I choosing out of love, guilt, Anger at Amy? Or some mixture I had not yet untangled? Mom watched me fill a legal pad with numbers one evening, while the baby slept in a borrowed bassinet near the couch. "You are 26, she said. "You still have a whole life you planned. If you do this, everything changes." I knew she was frightened for me, just as she had been frightened for Amy. But fear had already been given too much authority in our family. "She cannot stay suspended while all of us protect the lives we planned," I said. "She is already here." Mom looked toward the bassinet. For once, she did not ask me to think about. The legal process took time. Amy and Michael had separate representation and repeated opportunities to reconsider. They did not. Eventually, they signed the necessary consents, and I began the adoption process with home visits, background checks, financial disclosures, and a waiting period that felt endless but necessary. During those months, the baby stopped feeling like someone I was temporarily keeping safe. I learned the cry that meant hunger and the quieter one that meant she was overtired. I learned how she turned toward my voice and slept best with one foot against the crib. Love did not arrive as one dramatic revelation. It accumulated through bottles washed at midnight, doctor visits, laundry, worry, and the daily decision to be there the next morning. I could not keep calling her Grace. That name belonged to the child Amy had imagined before the ultrasound, a child loved only while she remained an idea. I chose Zoe, a name that meant life, because life was what she had insisted on from the moment she cried into the hospital room. One night, while the adoption was still pending, I held her near the kitchen window as rain tapped against the glass. She wrapped her small hand around my finger again. I pressed my lips to her hair and spoke the promise I had already been living. "If no one comes for you, I will stay." When the adoption was completed, the room was smaller and quieter than I had imagined. My mother sat behind me. The attorney closed the folder and smiled. One chair remained empty against the wall, a place Amy could have occupied if she had wanted to witness the life she had refused. I looked at Zoe in my arms and understood that I had not won anything from my sister. I had not taken her child or defeated her in some contest. I had accepted responsibility for a person who would grow, hurt, question, and one day need the truth. As I carried my daughter out of that room, the empty chair stayed behind. The life Amy had abandoned came home with me. Zoe's childhood did not unfold beneath hospital lights or inside legal offices. It unfolded at my kitchen table, on playgrounds, in school hallways, and in all the ordinary places where a child slowly discovers how the world sees her. When she was 4, she spent nearly 20 minutes trying to fasten the buttons on a yellow cardigan. Her left hand could steady the fabric, but it could not pinch the small plastic buttons the way her right hand could. I reached across the table to help, and she pulled the sweater away from me. "I can do it," she said. Her face tightened with concentration. She missed the buttonhole twice, then found a way to hold the fabric against the edge of the table while pushing the button through with her right thumb. The cardigan ended up crooked, and the bottom button went into the wrong hole. Zoe looked down at it, considered the result, and smiled. I wanted to fix it. Instead, I asked whether she liked it that way. "It is buttoned," she said, as though that settled everything. That moment taught me more about raising her than any specialist had. My job was not to make every task easy enough that she never struggled. It was to make sure she had the time, tools, and confidence to discover her own way. There were difficult moments. Other children asked why her hand was small. Some asked politely. Others grabbed before she could move away. Once, after a boy in kindergarten called it a baby hand, Zoe came home and refused to take off her coat. I sat beside her on the floor until she finally slipped one arm out. "Did I do something wrong before I was born?" she asked. I told her no. I said bodies grew in different ways, and hers had made one hand differently. I did not tell her she was special because I knew children could hear when adults used that word to avoid saying something honest. I told her she might need to solve certain problems differently, but nothing about her body made her bad. I also never told her that Amy was dead, or that there had been no one before me. When Zoe was young, I explained that another family had expected to raise her but became frightened and did not take responsibility. I told her I had carried her, and then chosen to become her mother. As she grew older, the questions became more precise. At 9, she asked whether I knew the woman who had expected to be her mother. At 12, she asked whether that woman had ever held her. At 15, she sat across from me at the same kitchen table where I had once agreed to carry Amy's embryo, and asked why I sometimes looked sad whenever she mentioned my sister. That was when I told her the fuller truth. Amy was not a stranger. She was my older sister. The embryo had been created from Amy's egg and Michael's sperm. Biologically, Amy and Michael were her parents. Legally, and in every way that shaped our daily lives, Zoe was my daughter. She listened without interrupting. Then she asked whether Amy had seen her after she was born. I told her Amy had not come to the hospital. Zoe stared at the grain in the tabletop. Was it because of my hand? I could not give her the answer she wanted, because the honest answer would have planted Amy's ugliest words inside her before she was ready to carry them. I said Amy had been afraid of a future she did not understand, and had made a choice that was not Zoe's fault. Zoe accepted the answer without believing it completely. After that conversation, I noticed she began hiding her left hand in photographs. Sometimes she placed it behind her back. Sometimes she tucked it under her right elbow or let a sleeve cover it. I never told her to stop because I did not want her body to become another subject adults managed for her. Still, every time she did it, I wondered whether Amy's rejection had reached her even without the cruelest details. Zoe never asked whether Amy had gone on to have another child. I knew the question lived between us because I had seen her pause when relatives mentioned Amy's family. She always changed the subject before anyone could answer. 3 years after Zoe was born, Amy and Michael used another gestational carrier through a different program. My mother told me about the pregnancy only after the first trimester, as if delaying the news could make it less painful. Amy told relatives that the first arrangement had failed because I changed my mind and refused to give her the baby. That version traveled farther than the truth, because it was simpler. Amy became the grieving woman betrayed by her own sister, while I became the carrier who grew attached and broke an agreement. Diane knew enough to understand that was false, but she asked me not to correct people publicly. "Think about the children," she said. At the time, only one child knew she had been abandoned. The other was not yet born. I told myself staying quiet would keep Zoe from becoming the subject of family gossip. I did not yet understand that silence creates its own version of events. Amy named her second daughter Peyton. The announcement called her the miracle we waited for, as though no child had existed before her. In photographs, Peyton wore soft white dresses and matching headbands. Amy and Michael stood on either side of her beneath carefully arranged light. Every image looked warm, balanced, and complete. I saw most of Peyton's childhood through photographs Amy posted publicly or sent to our mother. At 5, Peyton wore a tiny recital dress and held a silver participation medal. At 8, she stood beside a science fair board while Amy's caption listed the hours they had spent perfecting it. At 11, she sang at a community fundraiser. At 14, she appeared in family portraits wearing the same shade of blue as Amy. Diane occasionally mentioned details Amy did not post. Peyton had cried before a singing competition because she wanted to quit. Amy told her commitments built character. Peyton once received a B in math, and Amy arranged extra tutoring before the report card reached Michael's desk. When Peyton was sick before a holiday photograph, Amy gave her medicine, fixed her hair, and took the picture anyway. Michael rarely stopped her. In photographs, his hand rested on Peyton's shoulder. In my mother's stories, he usually said Amy only wanted the best for their daughter. Meanwhile, Zoe grew into someone who preferred making a stage beautiful to standing at its center. She studied theatrical design in college and worked part-time at the Fairview Community Theater. She could turn discarded wood into a doorway, age a new chair with paint, or repair a torn costume so the damage became nearly invisible. She liked backstage work because people there cared more about whether something functioned than whether it appeared perfect from the audience. By 21, Zoe had built a life full of friends, deadlines, coffee cups, and half-finished sketches spread across our dining table. Amy's absence still existed, but it no longer occupied every room. That late summer, the theater announced a youth production for high school seniors and college students. Zoe joined the design team. Amy, who now worked in community relations for a private arts center, enrolled Peyton in the acting program. From what my mother said, Amy believed a prominent role would strengthen Peyton's college applications. I knew none of that. On the afternoon, Zoe came home from auditions, carrying a stack of fabric samples and an expression I could not read. There was a girl there who seemed familiar, she said while opening the refrigerator. Not familiar. Like I have met her before. Just something about her. I asked for the girl's name, but Zoe said she had not caught it. She shrugged and changed the subject to a damaged costume rack. A few days later, after another rehearsal, Zoe told me more. The girl had dropped a folder of sheet music near the stage door. Pages scattered across the floor, and Zoe crouched to help gather them. One page slid beneath a bench, and Zoe reached for it with her left hand. The girl noticed. She did not stare, apologize, or ask what had happened. She simply held the bench steady while Zoe pulled out the page. She said the music was trying to escape before auditions, Zoe told me. I said it had probably heard her sing. The girl laughed instead of taking offense. Then she introduced herself. Peyton Whitmore. Zoe had gone still when she heard the name. Whitmore was not an uncommon surname, and she had never seen enough of Amy's private life to know what her daughter looked like now. She told herself it was coincidence. But as Peyton walked away, Zoe watched her turn toward the stage lights. The angle of her face caught the glow, and Zoe saw what I had feared she might someday recognize. The girl had Amy's eyes. During the next 2 weeks, Peyton's name began appearing in Zoe's stories almost every evening. At first, she mentioned her casually while sorting fabric across our dining table. Peyton had received one of the production's most visible roles. Amy had posted the announcement before rehearsal ended, praising her daughter's discipline and thanking everyone who had recognized what Peyton was capable of. Zoe noticed that Peyton did not look as pleased as her mother. When Elena congratulated her, Peyton smiled automatically and asked how many rehearsals the role would require. Later, while the cast gathered near the stage, she admitted to Zoe that she had considered asking for a smaller part. Before she could speak to Elena, Amy called. Zoe was close enough to hear Peyton say she was not certain she could manage the role with school and college applications. Amy's answer was loud enough to carry from the phone. Do you know how many girls would be grateful for this opportunity? Peyton apologized. By the time the call ended, she had agreed to keep the role. Zoe told me this while repairing a wooden picture frame intended for the set. One corner had cracked, and someone had suggested throwing it away because another frame could be bought cheaply. Zoe glued the split, reinforced the back, and painted over the repair without hiding it completely. It still holds a picture, she said, when I asked why she had spent so much time on it. That was how Zoe saw damaged things. She did not pretend the crack had never existed. She simply looked for what the object could still do. Her friendship with Peyton grew in the spaces around rehearsal. They ate burgers from the diner across the street, while the rest of the cast practiced a dance sequence. They sat on overturned storage boxes behind the curtain and talked about teachers, music, and the strange pressure of deciding what to do with the rest of their lives before either of them felt old enough to understand the question. Peyton told Zoe about singing competitions, school honors, and the volunteer projects Amy had selected for her. She listed them quickly, as though reciting information she had been trained to provide. Zoe asked what kind of music she listened to when no one else was around. Peyton paused. No one ever asks me that. According to Zoe, Peyton looked at her phone before answering. She did the same thing whenever Zoe asked whether she enjoyed acting, where she wanted to attend college, or how she would spend a completely free weekend. It was as though the correct answer might arrive in a message from Amy. Zoe never asked about awards. She did not ask whether Peyton had been the best singer, the youngest finalist, or the most impressive student in the room. Peyton seemed confused by that at first. Then she began talking more freely. They discovered small similarities that made Zoe uneasy. Both of them bit the inside of their lower lip when concentrating. Both hated raisins, but liked cinnamon bread. When a stage light flickered during rehearsal, they tilted their heads in the same direction before either realized the other had moved. None of those things proved anything. Families were not built from shared gestures and disliked foods. Still, every resemblance made the name Whitmore harder for Zoe to dismiss. I asked whether she wanted me to look into Peyton's identity. Zoe shook her head before I finished the question. If she is Amy's daughter, I do not want to find out by investigating her, she said. She has not done anything wrong. I heard the restraint beneath those words. Peyton might have been the child Amy had accepted after rejecting Zoe. Zoe had every reason to protect herself from that possibility. Instead, she was protecting Peyton from being reduced to evidence. The rehearsal that changed everything took place on a Thursday evening. Zoe had planned to stay late helping repair a rolling section of scenery, so I agreed to pick her up after 9. Shortly before I left home, she sent a message saying rehearsal had stopped and Peyton was not feeling well. By the time I reached the theater, Zoe had already moved Peyton away from the stage. I found them in a narrow backstage workroom, where the sounds of the cast were muffled by heavy curtains. Elena stood near the doorway, speaking quietly into her phone, while Zoe sat on the floor several feet from Peyton. Peyton's back was against a cabinet. Her breaths came too quickly, each one catching before it seemed to reach her lungs. She held both hands in front of her and stared at her fingers. "They are tingling," she said. "I cannot feel them properly." "You are breathing very fast," Zoe told her. Her voice was steady but not falsely cheerful. "Elena is getting help. You do not have to stand up." Peyton shook her head. "I forgot the line. I have never forgotten it there." Her phone vibrated on the floor. The screen lit with Amy's name, followed immediately by another message. Even from where I stood, I could see part of the preview. "Keep your shoulders back. You look tired in the rehearsal pictures." Zoe turned the phone face down without reading the message aloud. She asked Peyton to look at the red toolbox beside the cabinet, then the silver tape dispenser on the table, then the blue thread hanging from a costume sleeve. Peyton followed each direction with her eyes. Her breathing did not become normal at once, but it gradually stopped racing. Elena had already contacted the appropriate medical support and remained close enough to intervene. Zoe did not claim she knew how to cure what was happening. She simply kept the room quiet and gave Peyton something immediate to focus on while they waited. I stayed near the door. Peyton did not know who I was, and entering the center of the moment would only have given her another person to perform for. When her breathing eased, embarrassment replaced fear. Peyton pressed her palms against her knees and whispered that Amy could not find out. "She will think I am not ready for the role," she said. Elena assured her that needing a break did not mean she had failed. Peyton nodded politely, but her eyes remained on the phone. After Elena stepped into the hallway to update the staff, Zoe asked why telling Amy felt worse than what had just happened. Peyton swallowed. "Because when I do something right, she looks at me like I am everything she waited for. When I fail, she does not yell. She just looks disappointed, and the whole house changes." Zoe glanced toward me, then back at Peyton. I could see the moment she stopped viewing the girl as the daughter Amy had chosen instead of her. Peyton was not standing on the safe side of Amy's love. She was balancing inside it. "You forgot one line," Zoe said. "That does not change who you are. It changes who she thinks I am." Zoe leaned against the opposite cabinet, leaving enough distance that Peyton did not feel crowded. "You do not have to perform when there is no audience." Peyton looked at her for several seconds, Her gaze dropped briefly to Zoe's left hand resting openly against the floor. She did not ask what had happened or offer sympathy. She only noticed that the clasp on Zoe's tool pouch had twisted beneath her palm. "Do you want me to fix that buckle?" Peyton asked. Zoe looked down and smiled. "It has been annoying me all week." Peyton adjusted the strap carefully. The gesture was ordinary, which was why it mattered. She did not treat Zoe's hand as a tragedy, and Zoe did not treat Peyton's fear as weakness. Footsteps struck the backstage floor before I could introduce myself. A woman's voice demanded to know where Peyton was. I recognized Amy before she entered the room. She appeared in the doorway wearing a fitted coat and the expression she used when an event had stopped following her plan. Her eyes moved first to Peyton on the floor, then to Zoe beside her. Everything in Amy's face changed. She did not need an introduction. Her gaze fixed on Zoe's features before dropping to the visible left hand. For one suspended moment, neither sister spoke. Zoe had imagined meeting Amy in 100 ways over the years, but she had never imagined Amy looking frightened of her. Amy crossed the room and pulled Peyton to her feet. Her fingers closed around Peyton's wrist, firm enough to make the girl wince. "Mom, Zoe was helping me," Peyton said. Amy did not look at me. She looked only at the young woman she had refused to meet 21 years earlier. "Stay away from my daughter," she said. Zoe's face went still. Peyton turned toward her mother in confusion, but Amy was already pulling her toward the hallway. I moved beside Zoe as they disappeared through the backstage door. She kept watching the empty space where Peyton had stood. Amy's reaction had answered what a surname and a familiar pair of eyes could not. Peyton was Zoe's sister. The terror in Amy's face revealed something else. She had never told Peyton that Zoe existed. Zoe did not speak until we reached the parking lot. She walked beside me with her tool pouch pressed against her hip, staring at the place where Amy's car had disappeared. The theater door closed behind us, muffling the voices of the cast returning to rehearsal. "She knew me," Zoe said. I could not offer her a softer explanation. Amy had recognized the shape of her face, the hand she had refused to see after birth, and the daughter she had spent 21 years pretending did not exist. "Yes," I said. "She knew." Zoe looked back toward the theater. Peyton did not. Before I could answer, my phone began ringing. Amy's name filled the screen for the first time in years. I considered letting it go to voicemail, but Zoe was watching me. Silence had protected Amy long enough. I answered and switched on the speaker so my daughter would not have to wonder what was being said about her. "What did you do?" Amy demanded. Her voice shook with anger, but beneath it I heard the fear I had seen in her face. She accused me of enrolling Zoe in the theater program because I knew Peyton would be there. She said I had waited for the perfect moment to force the past into her daughter's life. "Zoe has worked at that theater for months," I said. "Neither of us knew Peyton had joined until they met." Amy gave a short, bitter laugh. "You expect me to believe that?" "I do not need you to believe it. It is what happened." In the background, I heard a door close, and Peyton asked her mother why she had recognized Zoe. Amy moved away from the phone before answering. Her voice became muffled, but not enough to hide the sharpness. "I told you there was a woman who betrayed us," she said. "That is her family." Peyton asked something else. I caught only a few words. "If the baby did not survive, then why?" Amy returned to the call before Peyton could finish. "You need to tell Zoe to stay away from my daughter," she said. "No messages, no rehearsals together, no accidental meetings. I will speak to the theater director if I have to." Zoe stepped closer to the phone. "Peyton is not a child you can move off a stage whenever someone makes you uncomfortable." Amy went silent for a moment. When she spoke again, she addressed me as if Zoe had said nothing. "You have already taken one daughter from me. You will not take another." The old accusation landed differently with Zoe standing beside me. For years, Amy had told people I had changed my mind during the pregnancy and kept a child intended for her. I had allowed the lie to exist because correcting it would have required exposing the ugliest part of Zoe's beginning. Now Amy was using that lie to make Zoe sound dangerous. "I did not take anyone from you," I said. "Then tell her to leave Peyton alone." I looked at Zoe. Her face was pale, but she held my gaze. "I will not order my adult daughter to participate in a lie," I said, "but I am not going to force the truth on Peyton either." Amy heard only the first half. She said I had been waiting for revenge since the day Zoe was born. Then she ended the call. Zoe stared at the dark screen in my hand. "She told Peyton you thought the baby died?" "Apparently she told her the first arrangement failed." "That is not the same thing." "No, it is not." We drove home without turning on the radio. The distance was short, but the silence inside the car carried 21 years of choices I had once called protection. Amy's lie had survived because I had never challenged it where Peyton could hear. At home, Zoe placed her tool pouch on the kitchen table and began removing items one at a time. A tape measure, 2 pencils, a small screwdriver, and a folded piece of sandpaper formed a careful row in front of her. She often organized objects when her thoughts felt too large. "Were you ever going to tell me she had another daughter?" she asked. I sat across from her. "I thought you would ask when you were ready." "I did not ask, because I was afraid." Her voice remained quiet, which made the admission heavier. She said she had noticed relatives stopping conversations when she entered a room. She had seen photographs of Amy with a young girl, but always looked away before reading the captions. She had convinced herself the girl might be a niece, a family friend, or someone unrelated. "If Amy had another child," Zoe said, "then I would have to know she did not decide she was incapable of being a mother. She only decided she was incapable of being mine." I reached for her hand, then stopped before touching it. She deserved room to finish. "I did not want you to carry that," I said. "So you carried it for me?" "I thought I was protecting you." Zoe looked down at the objects on the table. "Did it protect Peyton?" The question left me without the answer I had used for years. My silence had kept Zoe out of public conflict, but it had also allowed Amy to raise Peyton inside a false history. Peyton believed her mother had lost a child because I betrayed her. Zoe believed asking about Amy's later family might prove she had been replaced. Both girls had been shaped by information Amy controlled. "I do not know what telling Peyton would do to her," I said. Zoe's mouth tightened. "Not knowing has already done something to her. She thinks she has to earn the right to be loved, and now her mother is dragging her out of rooms because I exist." I reminded her that truth could also hurt Peyton. It could damage her relationship with both parents and force her to reconsider every story she had heard about our family. Zoe did not disagree. "I am not asking you to send her a box of documents," she said. "I am asking whether we are going to help Amy keep lying if Peyton comes to us." That distinction mattered. Zoe was not asking me to expose Amy publicly or chase Peyton with evidence. She was asking whether we would tell the truth if the girl searched for it herself. I said I needed time to think. Zoe nodded, but disappointment moved across her face before she gathered her tools and went to her room. Amy did not return my calls that evening. Elena contacted Zoe to say Peyton would not be returning to rehearsal for the foreseeable future. Amy had described the backstage incident as a medical concern and asked that all communication with Peyton go through her. 2 days passed. Zoe continued working at the theater but stopped mentioning Peyton. Each night, I found myself looking at the locked cabinet where I kept the ultrasound photograph, the legal records, and the email Amy had sent during the pregnancy. I did not open it. I was not yet ready to turn a young woman's entire family into a collection of documents. On the 3rd evening, Zoe's phone chimed while we were washing dishes. She glanced at the screen, then froze. The message had come through the theater's internal contact system. Peyton had found Zoe's name on an old rehearsal schedule and used the email address listed beside it. Zoe read the message once, then handed me the phone. Peyton wrote that Amy had told her the first gestational carrier became attached to the baby and refused to give her up. According to Amy, the pregnancy had ended so painfully that the family had agreed never to discuss it again. Peyton said she had believed that story until she saw Amy recognize Zoe. After returning home from the theater, Peyton had searched a keepsake box in the back of a closet. Inside, beneath infant cards and old fertility clinic paperwork, she found an ultrasound photograph. She attached a picture of it. Even through the phone screen, I recognized the glossy image I had not seen in more than 2 decades. The date was printed along the edge. It had been taken late enough in the pregnancy to contradict Amy's claim that everything had ended early. At the top, in Amy's handwriting, was the name Grace. On the back, visible in Peyton's second photograph, were the words, "Our little miracle." The picture proved that Amy had once expected a living daughter. It did not prove why I had brought that daughter home. From Peyton's position, another explanation was still possible. I could have carried a wanted child, become attached, and decided not to surrender her. Amy had built her lie around enough truth to make it believable. Beneath the photographs, Peyton had written only one direct question. "Were you the baby?" Zoe watched me read it. For several seconds, neither of us moved. Peyton had crossed the line Amy had drawn and come looking for an answer, but any answer would begin dismantling the family she thought she knew. I handed the phone back to Zoe. If we tell her the truth, there may be no way to put her family back the way it was. Zoe looked at the photograph of the child Amy had once called a miracle. Maybe it was never the way she thought it was. Zoe did not answer Peyton that night. She read the message again, set her phone face down, and walked to the living room window. Outside, the porch light caught the edge of the maple tree, but she seemed to be looking much farther away. "I thought I wanted her to know," she said. "Now that she is asking, I am not sure I can be the person who changes everything." I told her she did not owe Peyton an immediate answer. The truth involved Zoe's life before it involved anyone else's curiosity. If she wanted to wait, we would wait. If she wanted no contact, I would respect that too. Zoe folded her arms across her chest, hiding her left hand beneath her right elbow. "What if she decides I ruined her family?" "She may be angry," I said. "She may believe Amy at first. She may blame all of us because she does not know where else to put the pain. That is not the same as saying I did not ruin it." "No," I said. "But the lie existed before you met her." Zoe nodded without looking convinced. She had spent her whole life trying not to become a burden. Now even the truth felt like something she might force another person to carry. The next afternoon, my mother arrived without calling. Diane stood on the porch holding a covered casserole, the way she always did when she wanted to enter a difficult conversation through the kitchen. "Amy called me," she said after I let her in. "She is beside herself." Zoe remained at the table. She did not greet her grandmother or leave the room. Mom placed the casserole on the counter and lowered her voice. "Whatever happens, this needs to be handled quietly. Peyton is still young. There is no reason to tear apart 2 households." The words were almost identical to what she had said 21 years earlier. Back then, quiet had meant not challenging Amy when she called Zoe a mistake. Later, quiet had meant allowing relatives to believe I had stolen a wanted child. Now she wanted quiet to mean keeping Peyton inside that story. "Whose household are you trying to protect?" I asked. "I am trying to protect all of you. You knew Amy refused to take Zoe home." Mom's face tightened. I knew she was frightened. I knew the lawyers became involved. I did not know every detail. "You knew enough to know I did not steal anyone." She looked toward Zoe, and then away. "I thought if we stopped talking about it, everyone could move forward." Zoe spoke before I could answer. "Everyone except me." Mom sat down slowly. The casserole remained unopened between us. "I visited you," she said to Zoe. "I held you. I never treated you as if you were not family, but you agreed not to say my name around Amy." Mom's silence confirmed it. For years, Diane had maintained 2 separate families. In one, Zoe was her granddaughter. In the other, Amy was allowed to behave as though Zoe had never existed. Mom had called that balance. Sitting across from Zoe, she could no longer pretend the arrangement had been neutral. I told myself I was keeping the family from breaking, she said. It was already broken, I answered. You just asked the people who were hurt to stand quietly inside the pieces. Mom's eyes filled, but Zoe did not rush to comfort her. That mattered. Zoe had spent enough years protecting adults from the consequences of what they had chosen. After Diane left, Zoe took her phone upstairs. She returned almost an hour later and sat beside me on the couch. I want to answer Peyton, she said. But I do not want Amy here, and I do not want this to feel like we are building a case against her. I asked what she wanted Peyton to see. The papers that show what actually happened? Nothing more yet. I understood what she meant by yet. The email remained locked in my cabinet, and neither of us was ready to place Amy's ugliest sentence in front of Peyton. Zoe wrote back that she had been the baby, and that she was willing to meet if Peyton wanted the truth. She added one condition. The meeting would happen privately, without Amy, and nothing would be shown unless Zoe agreed. Peyton arrived at my house 2 evenings later. Diane had driven her after confirming with Michael that Peyton would be with family and would return later. It was not a secret disappearance or an impulsive escape. Peyton had asked for the meeting, and for the first time, the adults around her had allowed her to choose it. She entered wearing the same careful expression I had seen in the theater. Her posture was straight, her hair smooth, and her hands clasped tightly in front of her. She looked like someone arriving for an interview, rather than meeting the sister she had never been told existed. Zoe stood near the hallway. For a moment, neither girl moved. Then Peyton noticed the photographs on the wall. There was Zoe at 6 with frosting on her nose, Zoe at 10 holding a crooked birdhouse, Zoe at 16 in a backstage crew shirt, and Zoe last Christmas asleep on the couch with a book open across her chest. None of the photographs were dramatic. That was what made them powerful. Peyton stepped closer to one, showing Zoe in a paper crown at a school play. "You were here all this time," she said. Zoe nodded. "I had a whole life." Peyton's face tightened. "My mother told me there was no child to find." We sat around the kitchen table. I kept my explanation simple because the facts were difficult enough without turning them into a performance. I told her Amy and Michael had created the embryo. I had agreed to carry it. The anatomy scan showed a likely difference in the baby's left hand. Amy asked me to end the pregnancy. I refused. Peyton glanced at Zoe's hand, then looked down immediately, ashamed of having done so. I continued. Amy stopped attending appointments. Neither she nor Michael came to the hospital. After Zoe was born, they asked for further evaluations and then declined to take responsibility. Temporary arrangements were made. Lawyers represented everyone. No one handed me a child. Because I happened to be present. Peyton listened without interrupting until I brought the legal folder to the table. I did not open it. I looked at Zoe. "Are you sure?" She took a breath and nodded. Inside were the adoption order, the consent documents, and the records showing that Amy and Michael had legal representation. I turned only the pages necessary to answer Peyton's question. There was no need to make her read every procedural detail. She found Amy's signature first. Her finger stopped above it without touching the ink. Then she found Michael's name on the next page. "They both signed?" "Yes." "They knew you were adopting her?" "Yes." Peyton read the date, then returned to the signature, as though it might change if she looked long enough. The papers did not tell her why Amy had chosen to leave. They proved something more immediate. I had not stolen Zoo. Amy and Michael had participated in the process that made me her mother. Peyton pushed the folder away. She looked at Zoe, but there was no instant recognition, no sudden embrace, and no easy relief. "Do you hate me?" she asked. Zoe's expression softened. "I did not know you existed, but I got everything she would not give you." "You were a baby too," Zoe said. "You did not choose what she did." Peyton pressed her lips together, fighting tears. She showed me pictures of the nursery they made for me. She said I was the child who finally made everything right. Zoe looked toward the childhood photographs on the wall. I do not think either of us made anything wrong. Peyton covered her face with both hands. She was grieving a sister, a childhood, and a version of her mother at the same time. None of us tried to hurry her through it. Her phone began ringing. Michael's name appeared on the screen. Peyton did not answer, so he called me. Send her home, he said as soon as I picked up. His voice was controlled but not calm. Amy is panicking. She came here willingly, and Diane knows where she is. This should not be happening without us. It happened because of you, I said. He went quiet. I asked how much he had known about the story Amy told Peyton. He said nothing for several seconds, then repeated that they would explain everything at home. That silence answered more than the sentence. He knew enough to understand the lie, and had allowed Peyton to grow up believing it. Peyton took the phone from me. I am not coming home tonight. Michael protested, but she told him she would stay with Diane. Her grandmother had already agreed, and Peyton would call the next morning. It was not a permanent departure. It was one night in which Amy would not control the first hours after the truth. When the call ended, Peyton returned to the folder. She looked again at her mother's signature, then at mine on the final adoption order. Why would she tell me you stole a baby she signed away? Zoe looked at me. I knew the answer was waiting in the locked cabinet across the room, printed in Amy's own words and preserved for 21 years. Peyton's question remained in the kitchen after she stopped speaking. The legal folder lay open between us, Amy's signature visible beneath the light, but the paper could only prove what she had done. It could not explain why. I knew where the answer was. The email had waited in my locked cabinet for 21 years, preserved because an attorney had once told me to save every message. I had always imagined it as protection against Amy. I had never imagined placing it in front of her daughter. Peyton looked at me. There is more, isn't there? I did not answer immediately. Zoe sat across from her with one hand beneath the table. Her right shoulder had tightened, and I knew the hidden hand was not an accident. The same young woman who worked openly with tools and paint still concealed part of herself whenever Amy's rejection came too close. There is one email, I said. It was sent before you were born. The language is cruel. Peyton glanced at Zoe. Cruel to her? I told her it was. I could have decided the words were too damaging and kept them locked away. That was the kind of decision I had made for years while calling it protection. This time, I turned to Zoe. It is your history, I said. Do you want her to see it? Zoe did not answer at once. She drew her left hand onto her lap, then covered it with her right. Her eyes stayed on the legal folder. I want to read it first, she said. I retrieved the page from the cabinet and gave it to her folded. Peyton watched without trying to see over her shoulder. Zoe opened it slowly. I saw the moment she reached the final paragraph. Her face did not collapse. It became still. She had known the meaning of Amy's choice for years, but knowing a truth and reading the exact word used against you were different wounds. Under the table, her arm moved closer to her body. I wanted to take the page back. Instead, I waited. Zoe read the email a second time. Then she laid it flat and pushed it toward Peyton. She should know, she said. But I do not want this turned into an excuse for anyone to pity me. Peyton pulled the page closer. Her eyes moved through Amy's careful language about medical uncertainty, responsibility, and the future they had planned. Then she reached the sentence that stripped away every polite explanation. I won't spend my life raising a damaged child. Peyton stopped reading. Her fingers remained on the edge of the paper. For several seconds, the only sound came from the refrigerator motor behind me. She looked from the word damaged to Zoe's hand, and then back to the page. She was not discovering that Amy had been frightened. She was discovering that fear had become a judgment, and that judgment had been used to decide which daughter deserved to be kept. My mother wrote this before Zoe was born? She asked. I told her she had. Peyton read the date again. She knew almost nothing about what Zoe's life would be. She did not even wait to find out. The last possibility that protected Amy disappeared from Peyton's face. Amy had not been robbed of a child. She had not been powerless in a medical emergency. She had not simply misunderstood a legal process. She had looked at uncertainty and chosen rejection before meeting her daughter. Peyton leaned back. Her eyes lost focus, and I could see memories arriving in a new order. She told us about a winter concert when she was 13. She had awakened with a fever and asked to stay home, but Amy had already invited coworkers. Amy gave her medicine, fixed her hair, and told her people were counting on her. Peyton sang beneath hot lights while trying not to be sick. She remembered family photographs retaken because her smile looked tired. She remembered bringing home a bee and hiding the paper beneath her mattress until Michael found it. She remembered apologizing in the kitchen while Amy stood silently at the counter, even though Peyton still did not know what she was apologizing for. "I always thought she pushed me because she believed in me," Peyton said. "She may believe that," I answered carefully. Peyton shook her head. "She believed in the version of me that made her look like a good mother." Her phone rang before anyone could respond. Amy's name appeared on the screen. Peyton let it ring once, then answered and placed the phone on speaker. Amy did not ask whether Peyton was safe. She demanded to know what I had shown her. Her voice carried the controlled anger of someone trying to regain possession of a story. Peyton told her she had seen the adoption records and the email. Amy inhaled sharply. "You have no idea what was happening then. Brenda has taken private words from the worst moment of my life and removed all context." "The context was Zoe," Peyton said. "The context was a complicated pregnancy, incomplete medical information, and a carrier who refused to respect the intended parents. Your aunt has spent years poisoning this against me." Zoe flinched at the word poisoning. Amy still spoke as though her existence were a substance someone had introduced into Peyton's life. I said nothing. This conversation did not need me to win it. Amy ordered Peyton to return home. She said Diane had no right to keep her, and that family matters would not be discussed through stolen documents. Peyton's hand shook, but her voice did not. "I am staying with Grandma tonight. I will tell you when I am ready to come home. You are 18, not 30. You do not understand what Brenda is doing. I understand your signature." Amy switched tactics. Her voice softened. She said Peyton was exhausted, emotional, and being manipulated by people who resented their family. She promised to explain everything once Peyton returned where she belonged. Peyton closed her eyes. "I belong wherever I can ask a question without being told which answer I am allowed to believe." She ended the call. Zoe stood and walked to the sink. She turned on the water, even though there were no dishes to wash. "This is what I was afraid of," she said. "Her whole family is coming apart because she met me." Peyton looked at her. "It is not coming apart because you exist." Zoe kept her back to us, so Peyton continued. "It was damaged by the lie. You did not create that lie. You were the person it erased." Before Zoe could answer, Michael called. Peyton almost ignored him, but then accepted. He sounded tired rather than angry. He said Amy was overwhelmed and asked Peyton not to make permanent decisions during one emotional night. Peyton asked whether he knew Amy had requested the termination. Michael went quiet long enough that none of us needed his answer, but he finally admitted that he had known. She asked whether he had signed the papers. He said he had. Then she asked whether he knew what Amy had told her about Brenda stealing the baby. Another pause followed. "I knew it was not the whole story," he said. Peyton's expression changed. The pain became clearer, almost calmer. "You keep calling it silence like nothing happened," she said. "But every time you stayed quiet, you chose her version." Michael tried to explain that he had wanted to protect the family they still had. Peyton said he had protected the family image, not the daughters inside it. She did not cut him off forever, or threaten never to return. She told him she needed one honest conversation with both parents, and that she would decide what came after it. When the call ended, Peyton asked whether the rehearsal room could be used after hours. Zoe contacted Elena, who agreed to unlock it the following evening and leave once everyone arrived. She asked no questions beyond whether they would be safe. Peyton typed a message to Amy. Before sending it, she looked at Zoe. For the first time, there was no comparison in her face. No perfect daughter facing the rejected one. There were only two young women trying to understand what the same mother had taught them about being worthy. She did not love me more, Peyton said. I was just easier to show people. Then she sent Amy the time and place. Elena unlocked the rehearsal room shortly before 7 and left once she knew we were all inside. The main stage lights remained off. Only the emergency fixtures glowed along the walls, washing the stacked props and folded curtains in a dull gray light. Without an audience, the room looked smaller than it had during rehearsals, stripped of the illusion that anything performed there was real. Zoe stood near the edge of the room beside a rack of unfinished costumes. Her left hand was tucked behind her back. She had worked for years without hiding it while carrying wood, paint, and tools. Yet Amy's presence had returned her to the posture she used in photographs. I stayed several steps away. Every instinct in me wanted to move beside Zoe, but this meeting could not become another moment in which I decided where she stood or what she was ready to face. Peyton entered with Amy and Michael. At first, she remained between them. Michael looked older than he had sounded on the phone, his shoulders rounded beneath his coat. Amy appeared composed. Her hair was smooth, her lipstick exact, and her handbag hung from her arm as though she had arrived for a scheduled appointment rather than a reckoning with the daughter she had erased. "This has gone far enough," Amy said. "Peyton, we need to speak privately and clear up this misunderstanding." Peyton did not move. "It is not a misunderstanding. You have been given documents without context by people who have resented us for years." Amy looked at me when she said people. She did not look at Zoe. Peyton followed her gaze. "Say her name." Amy's expression tightened. "This is not about her." "Then say it." For a moment, Amy seemed unable to understand why one name mattered. She glanced toward Zoe, then away again. "Zoe," she finally said. It was the first time I had heard my sister speak my daughter's name. She said it carefully, like a word she did not want to keep in her mouth. Amy turned back to Peyton. "The doctors warned us that the pregnancy could involve serious uncertainty. Brenda refused to respect the wishes of the intended parents. I was young, frightened, and being asked to accept a future no one could explain." Each sentence contained enough truth to sound reasonable. The doctors had warned us about uncertainty. I had refused Amy's demand. She had been frightened. What she left out was the choice she made after every new piece of information. "The specialist said the rest of the pregnancy looked healthy," I said. "You were offered more information, support, and time. After Zoe was born, you were given another opportunity to accept responsibility. You asked whether doctors could make her look normal. When they could not promise that, you refused." Amy's eyes flashed toward me. "You always believed you understood what I could handle better than I did." "No," I said. "I believed Zoe deserved to live long enough to become more than your fear." I stopped there. I had spent 21 years imagining what I might say if Amy ever had to face the truth in front of both daughters. None of those speeches belonged in this room. The records were known. The email had been read. Whatever happened next had to come from the girls. Zoe brought her hidden hand forward only long enough to clasp it against her other wrist. She did not move closer to Amy. "You did not leave because I needed too much," she said. "You left before you knew who I would be." Amy's face changed, but Zoe did not give her time to turn the sentence into an argument. "I am not asking you to be proud of me," Zoe continued. "I am not asking you to call me your daughter. I needed Peyton to know I was not taken from you. You chose not to come." Michael lowered his head. "Zoe, I am sorry." She looked at him without answering. "I should have stopped it," he said. "I should have come to the hospital. I kept telling myself Amy was terrified and that we could fix things later. Then later kept getting farther away." His apology sounded sincere, but sincerity did not restore the years his silence had helped erase. Peyton turned toward him. You knew what she told me. Michael rubbed one hand across his mouth. I knew it was not the whole truth. You let me believe Aunt Brenda stole a baby from our family. I thought keeping the past closed was the only way to protect what we still had. Peyton's voice remained quiet. Your silence was an answer too. Michael had nothing to say to that. He stepped back, leaving a space between himself and Peyton that Amy immediately tried to fill. She reached for Peyton's wrist, but Peyton moved her arm away. Amy's composure cracked. Do you think I did not sacrifice for you? Every lesson, every doctor, every school, every opportunity came from me making sure you had the life you deserved. Peyton looked at her mother. The life I deserved, or the life you could show people? Amy shook her head. You are upset. Brenda has taught you to reinterpret everything as cruelty. I read your words. They were written during the worst moment of my life. They were written about a child. Amy took a step toward her. Everything I did was to give you the best possible life. The words settled into the empty room. They might once have comforted Peyton. I had heard Amy use similar language whenever control needed to sound like devotion. Peyton's gaze shifted past her mother toward Zoe. It moved from Zoe's face to the left hand she had drawn close to her body. Peyton had read the word damaged on the page. Now the person Amy had reduced to that word stood only a few yards away. When Peyton spoke, her voice was barely louder than the hum of the emergency lights. If I had been born different, would you have abandoned me too? Amy opened her mouth, but nothing came out. No one moved to rescue her. Michael did not explain. I did not answer for her. Zoe remained still. The silence lasted long enough for Amy's face to lose every prepared expression. She looked at Peyton as though the correct response had always existed somewhere, and had suddenly been removed. Peyton stepped away from her. Amy whispered her name. But Peyton continued across the rehearsal room. Her shoes made 3 soft sounds against the floor, before she stopped beside Zoe. For one uncertain second, the girls stood shoulder to shoulder without touching. Zoe looked at Peyton, then slowly offered her right hand. Peyton took it and held on. Amy said Peyton's name again, louder this time. Peyton did not turn immediately. She looked down at their joined hands, then at the sister she had been taught never existed. When she finally faced her mother, her voice was calm. I think I want to know my sister. Peyton left the rehearsal room with Diane that night. She did not announce that she was cutting her parents out of her life, and no one asked her to make a permanent decision while the shock was still fresh. She was 18 and legally able to choose where she stayed, but freedom did not erase practical things like school, clothes, college applications, or the car registered in Michael's name. For the next several days, she slept in my mother's guest room, while Diane helped arrange what Peyton needed from home, without forcing her into another confrontation with Amy. Amy called repeatedly at first. When Peyton stopped answering, she sent messages through Michael, then through Diane. She said she was worried that Peyton was being manipulated, and that one terrible chapter from decades earlier should not erase 18 years of motherhood. Peyton replied only once. I will speak to you when you can talk about Zoe without calling her a mistake, a theft, or someone else's influence. Amy did not answer that condition. Instead, she posted an old family photograph in which Peyton stood between her parents wearing a white dress and a practiced smile. The caption said their family was staying strong through a painful private misunderstanding. Peyton saw it while sitting at Diane's breakfast table. She did not cry or throw the phone. She opened the post, removed the tag connecting it to her account, and sent Amy another message. Do not use my image to tell a story I did not approve. The photograph disappeared within the hour. That was the consequence Amy seemed least prepared to face. No one arrested her, ruined her career, or dragged her before an audience. She simply lost the right to arrange Peyton into the position that best protected her image. Every time Peyton made a choice without asking permission, Amy discovered how little control remained once trust was gone. Michael came to my house 2 days later. Zoe agreed to be present, but she chose the chair farthest from him. He did not ask her to call him Dad, or claim that one apology could create a relationship that had never existed. I told myself I was saving my marriage, he said. Amy was falling apart, and I thought if I supported her, we could survive what happened and become better people later. Zoe looked at him steadily. Did you ever ask what surviving meant for me? Michael lowered his eyes. No. He admitted that after Peyton was born, challenging Amy's version would have forced him to explain why he had signed the papers. Each year of silence made the next year easier. Eventually, he no longer thought of himself as lying. He thought he was protecting the life they had built. You protected your marriage from the truth, I said. You did not protect your daughters. Michael nodded. He asked Zoe whether she might speak with him again someday. I do not know, she said, and I do not owe you an answer yet. He accepted that. It was the first useful thing I had ever seen him do for her. Diane's apology came more quietly. She sat with Zoe in our kitchen, where so many of our family's worst choices had been disguised as concern. Mom said she had believed keeping two parts of the family separate would prevent more pain. I called silence peace because I was not the one paying for it, she said. Zoe did not forgive her immediately. She only thanked her for finally saying the truth without asking anyone else to make it easier. Peyton and Zoe began learning how to be sisters without pretending biology had made them familiar overnight. Their first coffee lasted 20 minutes and included several uncomfortable silences. Peyton liked sweet drinks Zoe said tasted like melted candy. Zoe preferred old folk music, while Peyton insisted most of it sounded like someone apologizing beside a guitar. They disagreed easily, which seemed to surprise them both. Amy had taught Peyton that conflict threatened love. Zoe showed her that two people could dislike the same song, roll their eyes, and still meet again the next afternoon. Some days they talked about the past, other days they did not. Peyton asked what Zoe had been like in school, and laughed when I showed her a photograph of Zoe wearing a cardboard tree costume. Zoe asked Peyton whether she had ever enjoyed singing before Amy turned it into an achievement. Peyton said she thought she had, but she needed time to separate the music from the pressure surrounding it. Their relationship was not instantly tender. Peyton sometimes asked questions that hurt because she did not yet know where the wounds were. Zoe sometimes withdrew when Peyton mentioned a childhood memory with Amy. Neither girl demanded that the other react correctly. They began again whenever they could. The most difficult conversation for me came one evening after Peyton had returned to Diane's house. Zoe remained at our table, turning an empty coffee cup between her hands. I am angry with you too, she said. I had expected anger toward Amy and Michael. I had not prepared myself to hear that some of it belonged to me. Zoe said I had told her the truth in pieces, but I had always decided which pieces she was strong enough to hold. I had kept Amy's second daughter vague. I had withheld the email. I had treated my fear of hurting Zoe as if it were the same as Zoe choosing not to know. I thought I was protecting you, I said, then stopped. That sentence had already done enough damage in our family. I was wrong, I continued. The truth belonged to you. I should have helped you face it instead of deciding when you were allowed to see it. Zoe's eyes filled, but she did not look away. I did not explain how frightened I had been, or list everything I had done right as her mother. An apology that demanded recognition was only another way to control the response. I am sorry, I said. You do not have to forgive that tonight. She reached across the table with her right hand. I held it, understanding that even love built through staying could still make mistakes when it became too afraid of pain. Peyton returned to the theater the following week. She met privately with Elena and stepped away from the leading role Amy had wanted. She did not quit the production. She chose a smaller part and volunteered to help backstage, where mistakes could be corrected without becoming public evidence of failure. Amy sent one message after hearing about the change. I do not know how to fix this. Peyton showed it to Zoe while they were sorting costumes. Neither girl answered. The message was not an apology, but it was the first time Amy admitted there was something she could not control into perfection. Whether she changed would depend on what she did after that realization, not on whether her daughters relieved her discomfort. On the final evening of the production, the audience left and the cast began clearing the stage. Peyton still wore part of her costume. Zoe had dust on her jeans and a streak of paint near her cheek. They stood beneath a work light, laughing about a prop door that had jammed during the last scene. I raised my phone and asked for a picture. They moved together without waiting for instructions. Zoe slipped her left hand behind her back from habit. Peyton noticed, but she did not reach over or pull it forward. "Do you want to leave it like that?" she asked. Zoe looked down. For a moment, I saw every photograph in which she had tried to make part of herself disappear. Then she brought her hand forward and rested it openly at her side. Peyton smiled at her. "You don't have to hide anything from me." Before either of them could arrange their faces, they started laughing again. I took the photograph with the lighting uneven, Peyton's costume wrinkled, and Zoe's hand fully visible. No one asked me to retake it. No one edited it. The picture was imperfect and honest, and both girls were still there. A child should never have to become perfect before someone decides to stay.